going on, woman? And men who also struggle with this problem. My name is Lucas, and you are listening to the Important Things podcast, where I often come on here and try to set the bar. You know, there's this certain view these days that there's certain conversations that are too controversial. You know, you shouldn't say those things. That's too controversial, but I'm coming on here to set the bar. We can talk about these things, ladies and men. We can talk about these things. And what we're going to be talking about today is periods. It's an important conversation, a painful conversation. And I think it's important to address for women and men who both go through this, of course. 1 month. Let's start there. Let's dim the music. 1 month that needs to be lived with a constant. One thing I will say about this month is that there's always like little instances of ow, this hurts. You know, owie, I didn't like that. And I find generally the woman will complain about that more than the men, but we're both going through it. It's difficult for both of us. But now that being said, this gets me onto the topic of pain tolerance, because I think that's very important to this discussion generally. Let's take a woman, puts her hand on the stove, doesn't even notice. Hand starts searing, you know, there's blood spurting in the air, getting instantly cauterized, doesn't even notice. It's fascinating, really, the pain tolerance of the female gender. It's inspiring, to be honest. In many ways, I wish I could be like them. In many ways, I wish I could be them. Just for that period. I wish I could at least be there for them, you know. But men, I find we put our hand on the stove, we kind of notice, and we take that bad boy off. We don't want to get hurt. And I find that to be I think that's relevant to the conversation that I'm going to be having today, and that conversation's about periods. And this is something that, kind of like in the intro as I addressed, there's this rampant problem in the world where these controversial issues, people think they just can't be discussed. You know? Let's take a year. That's 12 times that this period needs to happen. 12 times. Men and women, we both go through it. 12 times. Pain. You know? You ever just wake up and get a calf cramp? You know? I'm talking to my men out there, you know? You ever just wake up and get a calf cramp? And I want the ladies to listen to this too. This isn't just about the men. Ladies, I want you to know that we men have to deal with, oftentimes, every period, every month. We will just have this excruciating pain on the lower part of our leg. I don't want to mansplain this. I'll say it's like the lower part of your leg, but then it's like, you know, like the kind of fat part. There's like a muscle there too, and you can flex it. We usually call that a calf. And it'll just like seize up and start buzzing. And we call that a calf cramp. And sometimes us men, depending on the time of month, will get an excruciating pain on that calf. I don't generally like talking about it. You know, this is something that makes me decently emotional. Not now. I wouldn't say I like cry. No, in fact, I don't cry. I think the last time I cried I think it's when my parents had me. I don't think I've cried since, because I usually try to stay, you know. That's a lie, actually. I was going to say I usually try and stay sort of emotionally intelligent above those sort of things. There was one time I was reading this Jane Austen book. Sorry. I think we're going to skip past that segment, but what I will say is that female literature, the sort of feminist literature, I find to be a bit of a tearjerker. I remember one time I was listening to the Feminism Manifesto, I think they called it, and there was a tear. There was one tear, I will say, for a good cause. For a good cause. I generally try to keep that stuff to a minimum, because I find that being manly sort of exemplifies how we are during our periods, during our low points. For example, when I get those calf cramps, it does hurt. And there's moments where I feel like if I was a lesser man, I would cry. And I think there might be lesser men out there that do cry. I would say that that's okay. It's okay that they cry, but I don't think that's okay. I think that's embarrassing. I think they should be reprimanded. And I think that they should have been probably spanked more as a child. To think that a calf cramp is enough to make a grown man cry is pathetic. But ladies, when you guys get your cramps, or when you hit your head on the cement during this period of time, it is okay to cry. It's okay to just let it out, It's okay to just sit back, you know what I mean? Let the tears stroll. And the interesting thing about that is, back in my day, I remember in middle school they used to call me the tear catcher. You know what I mean? There was this girl, and she was always real sad, always on the verge of tears, and I went up to her and I said, "You know what, though? You can just let that trickle. Just let it out." And she said, "No, I'm not sad. I'm just having these cramps." And I don't know what she was talking about. I usually only get my cramps when I'm in bed, but she must have been sleepy because she got a cramp. And I said, "It's okay. It's okay. I'm here. This is what I'm for. For you. And you and you. And so she let that tear fall. And I wiped it off her face. So ever since they called me the tear catcher, And they would laugh about it. They thought it was something to be embarrassed about. But I distinctly remember one moment where that same girl, I was sitting by her in another class. This was the year after. And I said, I didn't bring my pencil that day, and I asked her for the pencil, and she gave me that pencil. And you just think about little things like that. And you just think, this is mutual respect. We all have our periods, our monthly periods. We do. The difference is, I'll live mine alone so that I can spend my period with you on your period. You get what I'm saying? I won't address mine, but I'll address yours with you. 12 times a year, 12 more times for 12 years, and then after that we're probably pushing it a little bit. But I'll be there for a good while. I remember one time I heard a story. It was about a German, I think it was. And he had a big family. And you know what big families mean, that he had to make a lot of kids. And I still don't really know what kids come from. But either way, I know the only way to get them is by loving a woman. And I think this German guy, he knows respect. He knows what he's doing. I don't really know the end of that story, but I just think any example of someone who's willing to, care for a woman is a story that I think I'm called to share. Let's turn up the music a little here. It's getting a little hot. Pretty good song, royalty free. So, if there's any noises in the background you hear, those are my guinea pigs who I care for diligently. And I think that sets the tone, sets the bar. I care for them, and I care for others too on their periods. I used to think, when I get my calf cramps, I can suck it up, But when these women do, they cry. And I think, why is it that they can put their hand on a stove and not even notice till their hand's gone to the bone, but yet you get like a little bit of a cramp and the tears start falling, and I realized I think it's a mating call. I think that you guys actually aren't crying because it hurts. You're crying because you want the tear catcher to come catch that tear. And I remember making that epiphany. It was a few seconds ago. And I thought, you know what? That's what it's about. There's pain in life, but you should never have to go through it alone. And I just wanted to take this period of time to address that. And there's a few people who know me a little bit better, who have been alleging some things against me. And I just want to say, whatever you hear come out about me in the next, perhaps year, depending on when the non-disclosure agreements, decay legally, if they even do that, to be honest. But I'm waffling. There's things about me that are going to come out here soon, and I just want you guys to know that they're not true. And I don't know what they are. And if they do happen to be about some sort of harassment of the other gender, I want to let you guys know those are utterly false. But on top of that, I feel like I'm more interested in talking one-on-one. Here's the problem, and this is a beautiful song to say it on. Let me just bump this up. There's this understanding out there that, you're a YouTuber, you're a celebrity, and I know I'm pretty famous. But people will think, you don't have time to talk to me one-on-one. You're just a dude, I'm just a girl, Can't do that, that's weird. Talk to me in the comments where everyone else can see. I don't agree with that. And so, if you're a girl, just give me your number, dude, and I'll tell you about these allegations there and why they aren't true. Alright. Okay, some of it's true, but there's justification. There's reasons, there's more to it. I'm not a villain. You just gotta look into my soul and tear it out. And tear out your own soul. And then maybe let out a cry and I'll catch that tear, I want to thank you guys for watching. This is my video on periods. I'll be seeing you guys.